Okay, so here you got the answers. So basically, both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, they are very much similar, except that we know eukaryotic cells, they have the membrane-bound organelles such as nucleus or mitochondria, while for the prokaryotic cells, they do not have any membrane-bound organelles. So that is the major difference. And for sure, they are both living things, and they do have DNA as their genomic material. And for sure, again, both cells, they are able to reproduce themselves. So one example of prokaryotic cells that can cause disease would be bacterial infection. Of course, not all bacteria are bad, because we do need some bacteria inside the gut to help us for digestion. You have bacteria inside the soil to help fertilizing the soil and so on. But some of them could be opportunistic, and some of them would be very, very pathogenic. And for the eukaryotic cells, so what are the cell type you can think of under this category? You have got animal cells, plant cells, and yeast, fungus, and so on. So one example would be yeast infection, such as yeast infection by Candida albicans. So here's just one example. And for the viruses, are they even a living thing? The answer is no. So we'll come back to that later in the next slide. But they do have DNA or RNA as their genetic material, and they are able to replicate themselves. So I will not use the word reproduce, because they do not have the mechanism to reproduce. But instead, viruses, they have to rely on the host cells. They have to hijack the mechanism of the host cells to replicate themselves. So one example for viruses is HIV, and of course nowadays you know very well about coronavirus, which is an RNA virus, as it is having a genome composed of RNA. And how about prions? So prions is even more unusual, because these are basically protein molecules that have misfolded structure. So sometimes we call it aberrant structure. So aberrant means it is wrongly folded. It's not a living thing because it is just composed of protein, and as such it has no DNA or RNA because it is just pure proteins, and they are able to replicate themselves. So again, I will not use the term reproduce because this is not even a living thing. So one classic example of prions will be the mad cow disease, which will come back later in more details. Okay, now you know that viruses, they are not living organisms, but why? To answer this question, we need to look at the criteria of living organism. So first of all, in cell theory, you learn that all living things are made of cells, and definitely viruses, they are not cells. Then number two, all living things undergo metabolism, such as the breakdown of carbohydrates, the breakdown of food molecules to produce energy molecules such as ATP. But viruses, they do not undergo any form of metabolism. Number three, all living things use and produce energy through respiration, but viruses, they do not undergo any respiration. Number four, all living things grow and develop, but for viruses, they are not. So they will produce viruses with the exact size and shape, and they will not grow or develop any further. They can only replicate themselves. And then next one, for living things, they have definite lifespans. But for viruses, it all depends on how fast it can infect another host cells and reproduce. And next one, for all living things, they can reproduce themselves either sexually or asexually. But for viruses, remember, they do not have the mechanism to reproduce. What they can do is to hijack the mechanism of a host cell and start replicating themselves. And last but not least, all living things can respond to stimuli such as change of temperature, change of pH, and so on. But for viruses, they are known to be inert, which means they are inactive. So they only know how to mutate their DNAs or RNAs, but that is a completely random process. Okay, now let's look at the prion again, which is made of protein molecule. So prion is very famous for causing the mad cow disease, and it can be transmitted through the beef that you eat. So the normal prions, they are involved in the cell signaling and also what we call the neuroprotective actions such as antioxidant activities inside your brain. However, when a prion is misfolded or when it has an abnormal shape, then it can no longer perform its function. So when that happens, it is going to cause a prion disease such as the mad cow disease in this case. In this slide, I will show you the pathology of prion disease. So when you have the presence of abnormal prions, they tend to stick together, forming amyloid fibers, which is basically proteins that is insoluble. So they will precipitate out of the solution. So they are not only insoluble, but at the same time toxic to the cells, which means they will kill the neurons. So when this happens, astrocytes, which is a type of brain cell, will come and digest away the dead neurons, leaving holes in your brain, which is known as the spongiform brain, because it looks exactly like a sponge. Here I'm going to show you a range of spongiform diseases that are all caused by prions. First, you have scrapie that affects the sheep, and then you have BSE, the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or better known as mad cow disease that we have just discussed. And in human beings, you have Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and last but not least, we have Kuru, which is transmitted by a ritual cannibalism. And you could probably guess, what do they eat in order to get transmitted by this disease? Yes, you are right. They do eat human brains to get transmitted. So in all of these spongiform diseases, they will all lead to brain shrinkage as you have the loss of neurons, and that will lead to the deterioration of your cognitive functions. And all these diseases have no cure as you cannot regrow the lost brain cells.